Welcome, everyone. It's great to see everybody. I'm Leandra Lederman. I'm the William W. Oliver Professor of Tax Law at Indiana University, Maurer School of Law. And I'm really pleased to host today Francine Lipman, who's the William S. Boyd Professor of Law at UNLV William S. Boyd School of Law. And she's presenting Tax Audits, Economics, and Racism. And let me just give you a little bit of information about her background. I've known her for a long time, back when she taught at Chapman Law School. She has also been a visiting professor at UC Hastings College of Law and UNLV, and she does a tremendous amount of activism work. So in 2016, Governor Brian Sandoval appointed, and in 2020, Governor Steve Sisolak reappointed Professor Lipman to serve as Nevada Tax Commissioner. And the commissioner supervised the overall administration and operations of the Nevada Department of Taxation. And she is both a tax lawyer and a CPA and an exceptional scholar. So I'm very pleased to have her here with us today to present this really interesting paper. And with that, Francine, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's great to see everyone's smiling face. Like Professor Lederman, I am isolating, and I'm always a little bit surprised how happy I am to see people. I'm not in Las Vegas, despite these gorgeous tulips behind me. I am in Wisconsin, if you can believe that. Probably not too far from you. I haven't really looked at the map, Professor Lederman, but it's closer, certainly closer than Las Vegas. Before I get into my presentation, I did just want to mention that while I am really proud to serve the great state of Nevada as a Nevada Tax Commissioner, anything I say today is not my capacity as a Nevada Tax Commissioner. That has been an interesting experience and very eye-opening. And even though maybe some of you think about Nevada as a no tax state, we actually have a lot of taxes, including marijuana is legal in Nevada, in case you didn't know that, and we tax it generously. So with that, I'm going to jump into my PowerPoint. So as you can see, I love being inside of my PowerPoint so that I can point, although I'm not very good with which way to point. This paper was an invitation, so it was an invited paper with Oxford Economics Research, and the paper itself is limited to 10,000 words, and it was invited by an economic research institute to try to get more papers, progressive papers on law and economics. And so that's why when you read the paper, it was arguably not traditional law review. So it was a great opportunity for me to try to do a deep dive into economic research on this topic and connect some dots. So my goal with this paper is to connect dots that I have experienced from my frontline advocacy working with low-income taxpayers between racism and the fact that we are auditing the earned income tax credit at I would describe as a horrific rate, when the tax gap, meaning the amount that is owed versus the amount that is paid, is predominantly from wealthy white households. And yet we're targeting low income, disproportionately Black and Latinx poor families. So the paper proceeds in 4 parts. It starts off trying to explain the profiles of individuals. So any tax law comes to a taxpayer's profile. So tax laws are not written in a vacuum. And so while maybe on its face, something looks as if it is neutral, race neutral, because of our profiles, because of hundreds and hundreds of years of history, we each come to the tax system. We each come together with a different privilege and burdens. This is, I could not address this topic without pointing out some critical books that I've read and that have literally opened my mind and heart and made me think critically about these topics. The newest one is The Whiteness of Wealth from Dorothy Brown. That's a must read. Heather McGhee's best-selling The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone. And I saw a recent monetization of that, almost $23 trillion. Racism costs all of us. The Color of Law, which is just a classic by Richard Rothstein, and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi. He's at the University of Boston. At these difficult times, we just saying I'm not racist is not enough. We have to be anti-racist. And I think we need to embed that in the tax system. So as you probably know, the United States has had record inequality. And so it's not just a universal global problem. This is something that is somewhat unique to the United States. We have the worst inequality among the developed countries. And some of that is because of our tax system. And what we need to do when we think about inequality is deconstruct it. There are some brilliant economists, including Sandy Darity, Derek Hamilton, Dania Francie, who are Black economists who have taken data and stratified it, just looking at different demographics. When we look at Black and Latinx families and their households and compare their wealth to white households, the disparity, the difference is enormous and it's crippling. This is wealth. We can do the same with income, but not having wealth undermines a family's ability to manage different hiccups. And indeed, we've seen that in spades when we look at the pandemic. Tragically, Black and Latinx families have really suffered because not only do they not have the safety net of savings or liquid assets or even housing, but they have been essential workers. And so this profile and imposing the tax system on it, and by the way, the tax system, of course, is intentional by Congress, our elected individuals. So this profile is not unknown. And frankly, it's not new. It's a result of centuries of racism, centuries of redlining, occupational segregation, wage disparities, implicit and explicit racism. So we come to the tax system with our profiles already baked in. This is work from Derek Hamilton. And so many anti-poverty, I do a lot of work in poverty law. So many anti-poverty individuals have said that, experts have said, The way we fix poverty is through marriage, work, and education. And the issue is they're shifting the burden of poverty to the individual. They're suggesting and have been and shaped the resources by saying this is individual responsibility. We've heard the tropes of people being lazy, the deadbeat dad, the welfare mother. These are racist tropes to justify, to rationalize their poverty in the face of true economic burdens and hurdles. So Dr. Hamilton has pulled out different demographics and statistics to show that at every level of educational attainment, white households by far have massive wealth compared to Black households. 3 times the wealth, even at the graduate level with a PhD or a JD. A college-educated Black individual has on average less wealth than a white household with a high school dropout. So education doesn't fix the racial wealth gap, including marriage. The money that has been allocated to welfare reform through TANF, through the temporary aid to needy families, often is targeted to marriage planning because they're saying marriage will fix poverty. Well, that again is a smokescreen. White households with a single parent have more than 2 times the net worth of 2-parent Black households. Work as well. If people would just work, then they wouldn't suffer poverty. It's individual responsibility. People are too lazy. No, this is because of systemic and institutional racism. White households, even unemployed, have more net worth than Black households working full time. This is not because of lack of individual responsibility. It is because hundreds of years of pervasive systemic and institutional racism targeted undermining of Black and Latinx wealth and targeted lifting up of white wealth, especially white male wealth. When we look at the demographics of the different types of assets that Black versus white households have, again, it is glaring to see that because of redlining and because of inability to amass savings, lack of inheritance, Black households and Latinx households have much less equity in their homes or home ownership or liquid assets. When you're only making 62 cents an hour compared to the $1 an hour a white male makes, 62 cents for every white $1, that is women of color, then it's difficult to save. It's difficult to have liquid assets. Retirement. When Social Security was first created, Social Security did not cover traditionally Black and Latinx jobs like farm workers or caregivers. So retirement is undermined. There is occupational segregation. When we look at certain industries, essential workers, and we've seen this glaringly as a result of the pandemic, folks are truly suffering, having this burden of being in certain occupations, and that is not often by choice. That's not individual responsibility. Frankly, that is because of systemic and institutional racism. So when you bring this profile to a tax system The tax laws in and of themselves might be race neutral, but when you impose these laws on these profiles, you get disparate impact, and that truly is because of systemic and institutional racism, which we've got to push back against, because it costs all of us. When we look at our US tax system, it is voluntary self-assessment. Taxpayers have the burden of annual filings, annual payments, and self-imposing the tax system on us. Government has the burden of implementation, processing, and enforcement, collection. IRS is typically really a collection agency. What has happened since about 1996, when President Clinton was in office, our tax systems are increasingly delivering social benefits. And that is because of a welfare to work mission. The purpose was to incentivize work to mitigate poverty. And where do we measure work? Earnings, the tax system. So more and more welfare is delivered through the tax system rather than through more traditional spending programs. And so you have to file and deal with the IRS to get your anti-poverty program monies. Otherwise, you don't get them. So you're having to deal with the IRS. Wage income is mandatorily reported, as we all know, mandatory automatic withholding, and the compliance rate for wage income is 99%. Can't get much better than that. And so if you're a laborer, if you come to the tax system as a worker rather than an investor, you're paying into the system. The system automatically over withholds, because that again makes intuitive sense for us as a society and for us to raise money in a system that is self-assessment and voluntary. As a result, individuals, to get their refunds, must file and deal with the Internal Revenue Service, as compared to investors, people who are dealing with capital gains, pass-through income from partnerships and S corps. Those are disproportionately white, wealthy households. Wage earners are disproportionately Black and Latinx households. So we come to the system with our own profile. For years, the US has been defunding, for decades, over 25 years, the US has been defunding, not the police, but the tax system police, the IRS. And it's been systemic. It's been constant through Congress. As a result, the IRS has significantly cut back on its enforcement. It's gone from about 115,000 employees down to about 74,000. So they have dramatically cut back on enforcement, but not across the board, meaning that they have cut back more on high income audits of corporations and of very wealthy individuals compared to low income taxpayers. But more importantly, for those of you that are on the front line of tax justice like I am, the IRS has defunded access to tax justice, meaning that to get a paper return processed or any sort of correspondence, it takes months. The only way you can correspond with the IRS, generally speaking, is through mail. If you want to call them, it's hours literally on the phone. If you're an essential worker or mother with children, you don't have time to sit on hold. Because of the pandemic, this has been exacerbated. the IRS has a telephone call response rate of 9 to 24%. And even if you're lucky to get someone to answer the phone, more often than not, honestly, they don't answer your question. I've had many times when I've called as using a professional access line, and they'll just read you the notice, which you already have. So it's not even a meaningful access. So trying to seek assistance is virtually impossible. And the tax, as a result, we have this enormous tax gap, 381 billion, and that's after collection. The commissioner of the IRS, Chuck Reddick, has testified before Congress. The annual tax gap, he says, is closer to $1 trillion. $1 trillion every year uncollected that's owed. The CBO report has indicated, the Congressional Budget Office has said, if we just spend $20 to $40 billion more in IRS funding, we could collect an additional $60 to $100 billion. Economists Sarin and Summers have estimated that if we just increase it to historic levels before the giant cuts, we could collect over $1 trillion in 10 years. The return on the investment of funding the IRS is overwhelmingly significant. These are tax dollars that have not been assessed. And what's so frustrating is many of these are very high income, wealthy individuals who are disproportionately white, male households. And who are we targeting with our audits? Low income, working families with children who are disproportionately Black and brown, not because of lack of individual responsibility, but because of systemic and interesting, very interesting systemic racism and institutional racism. And when we look at the components of the tax gap, it is predominantly pass-through income, an income that is not notified, that's not noticed to the IRS. It is not wages. It is predominantly investment income. Who owes this? Not surprisingly, the top 10%. Economists have monetized that it could be as high as 70% of the tax gap is owed by the top 10%, who again are disproportionately white households because of centuries of systemic and institutional racism. If you look at the lower income families, who are the ones who are claiming the earned income tax credit, they have a very low share of the tax gap. As I said, while enforcement has dropped, it has not dropped across the board. What has happened, there's a recent Treasury Inspector General report that was just issued September the 3rd. So I encourage everyone to look at this. This just came out. And it shows that the earned income tax audits, which are 37% of all audits of the IRS for the year, are on the earned income tax credit. Those audits, the average auditor spends 1.6 hours. That is easily how long you could be on hold trying to get through to someone. Why is the audit rate so low? Why is the number of hours spent so low? because people can't get through. They can't even connect to the IRS. So what do? They give up. You can see that the correction rate on the earned income tax credit is behind me is 13%. So of these audits, yes, they're very effective because the taxpayers don't have a voice. They don't have the opportunity to be heard. 43% of all audits in 2018 had an earned income tax credit. So that necessarily is a low-income working family with children. Might be a childless worker, but generally not. For the last 10 years, 31% of all audits were on earned income tax credit, when the tax gap is disproportionately high-income wealthy individuals. 99% of all EITC audits are correspondence audits. What does that mean? By mail. 80% of all earned income tax credit audits are pre-refund. So that means the monies do not go out, and the taxpayer has to affirmatively respond to the approval of the IRS to get their money back. So this is really not a significant financial risk. What is so maddening is that 69 to 75% of all taxpayers never received their notice. They never responded, or they stopped responding. And any one of you who has received an IRS notice, including many of my law students, the notices are conclusory. They feel as if it is resolved, the issue is resolved. Many of these individuals, English is a second language, not highly educated, and so the letters themselves can be overwhelming to even understand what is being asked. And it's a very transient population. So many times they don't even get the mail. They don't even have the opportunity to understand what's going on. They just think that they've been denied the EITC before they even respond. So only 15% of all earned income tax credits are actually affirmatively proven not to qualify. And generally it is because these individuals do not have access to the resources to respond. And the IRS, the way it's designed, the way it's funded, does not have the capacity to effectively communicate with these taxpayers. Average audit, 207 days. This was kind of a blockbuster explosion, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of go through this quickly. This is a map of the audit density. And if you look at audit density, this map to me as an anti-poverty scholar on the front lines of tax justice looks like the Southern poverty Black and brown border belt. This is where the audits are. What's interesting is the Northwest is disproportionately higher income and white. Well, when we look at the counties with the highest audited counties, the top 10, 8 of them are in Mississippi. In counties that are very disproportionately Black and Latinx and disproportionately poor and disproportionately do not have access to lawyers. The numbers on the far right of your screen are the number of lawyers that the ABA shows in that county. In the United States of America, the Black population is about 14% nationwide. Poverty is hard to judge because of the pandemic, but poverty is about 11% at this time nationwide. Now we look at the top 10 least audited counties. They are disproportionately white and disproportionately under the national poverty average, and disproportionately have more lawyers. This recent TIGTA report that I mentioned, and I'm happy to do a deeper dive on this because I think this data is important. The top 10 audited states are disproportionately not white and disproportionately poor. Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Arkansas, and my home state of Nevada. The states that are disproportionately not audited, least audited, are very white. Vermont, 94% white, and poverty rates under the average poverty rate. So when we look at this data, the disparate impact, and we see that these statistics, this poverty, the children in families that are claiming the earned income tax credit and the refundable child tax credit, their demographics are as a result of centuries of racism. And yet our institutions are auditing them at an excessive rate because of our system. The earned income tax credit is targeted because these correspondence audits that are not successful, the lack of response is deemed to be, when you talk to politicians, and I have to lobby for earned income tax credit benefits, they think that the error rate, the improper payment rate, is because of fraud. It is because of, and the IRS itself has actually asked the Office of OMB to take the earned income tax credit off the improper payment list. So that is good progress. The IRS says that this is because of complexity in the system. It's predominantly because the children are not deemed to be resident in the household because the family can't prove it up because they don't have the capacity to respond. When we look at the earned income tax credit, it really pays for itself. Economists Bastian and Jones have showed that just in 1 year, 83% is self-funded. But when we look at it over a much longer term, we see that with enhanced well-being, education, labor, retirement, really effectively pays for itself. Post-audit behavior, when you're audited, not surprisingly, that discourages work. So when we look at tax returns after they've been audited, they typically don't claim the earned income tax credit, although someone else claims that child. So it's not necessarily that the child, we know the child exists, it's just perhaps the wrong household was claiming the child. So our tax system, our audit system is broken. In reality, white households have gotten privileges beyond and above that have enhanced the wealth. We've undermined Black and Latinx households through institutional and systemic racism. Equality is not enough because it just equalizes everyone, and some people are so far underprivileged. Equity is even not enough. What we need is tax justice to break down this audit barrier, stop undermining the ability to get this anti-poverty benefits, and audit the individuals who have the capacity to pay their taxes who aren't. Amanda Gorman, who is a young, brilliant, and bold poet who spoke at the Biden inauguration. I hope you have a chance to read her poetry. She says sometimes the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. We need to think critically, think differently. And I love talking to young tax students about these issues because you are the minds who are going to change this on a going forward basis. Tax law is not just about making the wealthier wealthy. It's about delivering precious resources to all of us. And we have never seen a better example of that than the current payments going out for the fully refundable child tax credit. After just 1 month of arguably modest payments, 3.3 million households claimed that they were no longer food insecure. The future is amazing. Anything is possible. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your comments and questions. And I know Andrew has been so patient with his hand up since I almost first opened my mouth. So, Professor, I'm happy to take questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.